Montana Territory, 1871. The amber light of autumn swept across the valley, painting the land in hues of gold and crimson as the year's first snow began to fall. Quinn Caldwell sat alone on the rough-hewn porch of his modest ranch house, watching the flakes descend in lazy spirals. At 25, he'd already spent more years in saddle leather than most men twice his age, the harsh frontier life etching subtle lines around his clear blue eyes. Quinn believed the Montana Territory was no place for tenderness. The unforgiving land demanded strength, not softness, and he'd built his walls high after watching his parents succumb to the brutal winter of '63. Their graves sat on the hill behind his cabin, silent reminders that love was a liability in a place where survival consumed every waking moment. His ranch, the North Star, was all that mattered now, keeping it running, expanding his small herd, outpacing the seasons that threatened to take everything. A man needs nothing but his own 2 hands and a good horse, he often told himself, though the empty chair beside him on the porch sometimes seemed to mock this conviction. Still, Quinn remained steadfast in his belief, his handsome features set in determination as he surveyed his 100 acres. His broad shoulders carried the weight of solitude with practiced ease, and if he occasionally found himself talking to his cattle or his faithful border collie, Ranger, for want of human conversation, well, no one was around to notice. The first snow always brought a quiet dread. Another winter to survive, another test of his resolve. Quinn rose from his chair, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light, and prepared to check his herd one last time before darkness fell. His youth still showed in his movements, fluid and strong, unmarred by age, but his eyes carried the weathered look of a man who'd faced the frontier's cruelty and refused to bend. "Come on, Ranger," he called to the black and white dog curled at his feet. "Let's make sure those yearlings made it back to the north pasture." Quinn Caldwell didn't know it yet, but this winter would test more than just his survival skills. It would challenge everything he believed about life in the Montana wilderness and about himself. The snowfall intensified as Quinn guided his horse along the ridge overlooking his property. The temperature was dropping faster than he'd anticipated, and the wind cut through his wool coat with icy precision. His gloved hands gripped the reins tightly as visibility deteriorated, transforming the familiar landscape into a disorienting white void. As he turned his horse back toward home, a faint sound carried on the wind, something that didn't belong among the natural rhythms of the approaching storm. Quinn reined in, listening intently. There it came again, the distant jangle of harness bells and a voice calling out in desperation. Against his better judgment, he urged his horse toward the sound, following the eastern trail that connected his ranch to the main road. Through the swirling snow, a shape gradually emerged. A small wagon tilted precariously off the side of the road, one wheel broken clean off its axle. A woman's voice called out again, thin with fear. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please help us." Quinn approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. In the territory, caution often meant the difference between life and death. What he found was no ambush, but a young woman of perhaps 20, struggling to calm a panicking horse while simultaneously trying to shield a small shape huddled beneath a threadbare blanket in the wagon bed. "Oh, thank heaven," she breathed when she saw him, her face a portrait of relief beneath a snow-dusted bonnet. Her cheeks were flushed with cold, but her eyes, a startling shade of green, were clear and direct. "Our wheel broke, and my brother's taken ill with fever. We've been stranded for hours." Quinn dismounted, surveying the situation with practiced efficiency. The wagon was beyond quick repair, and nightfall, paired with the intensifying storm, made their position increasingly dangerous. "Miss, there's no fixing this tonight," he said, his voice roughened by disuse. "My ranch is about 2 miles back. You and your brother can shelter there until the storm passes." The young woman pushed back her bonnet, revealing hair the color of summer wheat tied in a practical braid. "I'm Emma Zimmerman," she said, extending a gloved hand with surprising formality given their circumstances. "And I accept your offer with gratitude, Mr. Caldwell." Quinn Caldwell. He took her hand briefly, then turned his attention to the small form in the wagon. "How old is your brother?" "Thomas is 8, Emma replied, her voice softening with worry. "He's burning with fever." We were headed to Helena to meet our uncle when the wheel gave way. Quinn's jaw tightened. An 8-year-old with fever, caught in a snowstorm, miles from proper help. The territory showed no mercy, not even to children. Despite his instinct to keep strangers at arm's length, he found himself moving with decisive purpose. I'll take the boy on my horse. You'll ride behind me. We can secure what valuables you need, but we need to move fast before this storm gets worse. Emma nodded, her practicality matching his own. She gathered a small bundle of belongings and her brother's medicine while Quinn unhitched her horse and secured it to follow behind. When he lifted the boy from the wagon, he felt the heat of fever through the blanket. Too hot, dangerously so. With the child secured against his chest and Emma positioned behind him, arms wrapped tentatively around his waist, Quinn turned his horse toward home. The storm closed in around them, erasing their tracks almost as soon as they were made. Quinn felt the unfamiliar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, not just for his land or his animals, but for human lives that now depended on him. As they rode through the thickening snow, Emma leaned closer, her words barely audible above the wind. "Thank you. We would have died out there." Quinn said nothing, but something shifted uncomfortably within him. He'd spent years convincing himself that isolation was safer than connection, that independence was strength. Yet here he was, riding through a blizzard with two strangers who had breached his carefully maintained solitude. The North Star Ranch was about to receive its first guests in 8 long years, and Quinn Caldwell wasn't at all sure how he felt about that. By the time they reached the ranch house, the storm had transformed into a full-blown blizzard. Quinn helped Emma dismount before carefully passing her brother down to her. The boy's face was flushed with fever, his breathing shallow. "Get him inside," Quinn instructed, nodding toward the door. "I'll see to the horses." Emma didn't argue, hurrying through the snow with Thomas in her arms. Quinn worked quickly in the barn, unsaddling and rubbing down his horse, ensuring Emma's mount was comfortable as well. When he finally pushed through the howling wind to his cabin, he found Emma had already located his limited medical supplies and was bathing her brother's forehead with cool water. "He needs medicine stronger than what I have," she said without preamble as Quinn shrugged off his snow-covered coat. "The fever's getting worse." Quinn crossed to the cabinet near his small iron stove. "I have willow bark tea that might help, and some whiskey to bring the fever down." "You're a doctor?" Emma asked, hope flickering in her eyes. "No, ma'am. Just a man who's had to patch himself up more times than I care to count." Quinn set water to boil, then brought wood to stoke the fire. "This storm's likely to keep us here for at least 2 days. We'll do what we can for him." As he worked alongside Emma to care for the boy, Quinn found himself observing her through sidelong glances. She moved with practiced efficiency, her slender hands gentle but sure. Her dress, though travel-worn, was well made. Dark blue wool with careful stitching at the collar and cuffs. Not wealthy, perhaps, but respectable. "Where were you headed before Helena?" he asked as they sat vigil by the child's bedside, the storm rattling the windows with increasing fury. Emma's gaze remained on her brother as she answered. "We were living with family friends in Bozeman after our parents died last spring. Typhoid." She adjusted the cool cloth on Thomas's forehead. "Our uncle in Helena is our only remaining family. He sent for us when he learned of our situation." Quinn nodded, understanding loss all too well. "And you traveled alone? 2 days through the territory?" A hint of defiance flashed in her green eyes. "What choice did we have? The family we stayed with couldn't support us through another winter, and the stage would have cost 3 months' wages." Her chin lifted slightly. "I can handle a wagon and a rifle, Mr. Caldwell. We would have made it if not for that wheel." Quinn didn't doubt it. There was a resilience in Emma Zimmerman that reminded him of the few frontier women he'd known growing up, his mother included. Women who faced the harsh realities of territorial life without complaint, who worked alongside men with equal determination if not equal recognition. As the night deepened, Thomas's fever seemed to worsen despite their efforts. The boy tossed restlessly, occasionally crying out for his mother in his delirium. During one such episode, Quinn found himself moved by the tender way Emma soothed her brother, singing softly and stroking his hair until he settled. "You should get some rest," Quinn said, standing from his chair. "Take my bed. I'll watch the boy." Emma looked up, surprised. "I couldn't. You need sleep," he insisted. I'll wake you if there's any change. After a moment's hesitation, Emma nodded, her exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. Thank you. For everything. When she had retired to his small bedroom, Quinn took her place beside Thomas, awkwardly adjusting the cool cloth as he'd seen her do. The boy's breath came in ragged gasps, his small face contorted in pain. Quinn had faced down rustlers and survived blizzards, broken wild horses, and built his ranch from nothing. But this child's suffering left him feeling utterly helpless. You hang on, boy, he murmured, more to himself than to Thomas. Your sister needs you. Outside, the blizzard raged with unrelenting force, sealing them in this unexpected arrangement. Quinn Caldwell, who had prided himself on needing no one, now found his solitary world invaded by strangers who stirred emotions he'd long since buried: compassion, worry, and a strange, unwelcome sense of connection that defied his carefully constructed isolation. Dawn broke with eerie silence, the storm having exhausted itself sometime during the night. Quinn, who had dozed fitfully in the chair beside Thomas, woke to find Emma already up, preparing coffee at the stove. Her hair had come loose from its braid during sleep, falling in golden waves down her back. His fever broke about an hour ago, she said quietly, noticing Quinn's awakening. He's sleeping naturally now. Relief washed over Quinn, surprising him with its intensity. Good. That's good. He moved to the window, pushing aside the curtain to survey the damage. At least 2 feet of snow blanketed his property, pristine and untouched in the early morning light. The storm had been even worse than he'd anticipated. We won't be going anywhere for a while, he observed, turning back to Emma. The pass to Helena will be impassable for at least a week, maybe more. Emma brought him a steaming cup of coffee. Then it seems we're imposing on your hospitality longer than expected. She hesitated, then added, I know this isn't what you wanted, Mr. Caldwell. Having strangers in your home. Quinn, he corrected automatically. And it's not. He paused, struggling to articulate something he barely understood himself. It's just been a while since I shared this place with anyone. Emma's gaze was too perceptive for comfort. How long have you been alone here? 8 years, he answered, surprised at his own honesty. Since my parents died. Built most of it myself. It's a fine home, Emma said, glancing around the modest cabin with genuine appreciation. Sturdy. Well made. Her simple approval shouldn't have mattered, but Quinn found himself oddly pleased by it. He cleared his throat. I need to check the cattle. The snow will have them bunched up in the South Ravine. Of course. I'll look after Thomas and perhaps see about breakfast. She glanced at his nearly empty pantry. Though your supplies seem rather bachelor-oriented. Was that amusement in her voice? Quinn felt a smile threatening, an unfamiliar sensation. I manage. I'm sure you do, Emma replied, with just enough skepticism to make her point. Outside in the brilliant, snow-blinded morning, Quinn trudged through drifts toward his barn, his thoughts in unusual disarray. There was something about Emma Zimmerman that unsettled his carefully ordered existence. Her composure, her obvious care for her brother, the graceful way she'd adapted to their situation without complaint. The cattle had indeed gathered in the protected ravine as he'd predicted, huddled together against the cold. Quinn broke ice from the creek and checked for any animals in distress. The work was familiar, grounding, yet his mind kept returning to the cabin and its temporary inhabitants. When he finally returned, stomping snow from his boots at the door, the scene that greeted him was so unexpectedly domestic that he paused in the threshold. Thomas was awake, propped up on pillows at the table, his cheeks still flushed but his eyes clear. Emma stood at the stove, her sleeves rolled up as she cooked. The cabin smelled of coffee and frying potatoes. Somehow she'd transformed his meager supplies into something that resembled a proper meal. Mr. Caldwell saved us, Tommy, Emma was explaining to her brother. We're going to stay here until the snow clears enough to continue to Uncle Robert's. Thomas regarded Quinn with solemn eyes. Thank you for saving us, sir. You can call me Quinn, he replied awkwardly, and used to children. Feeling better? The boy nodded. Emma says I was very sick. You were, Quinn confirmed, hanging his coat by the door. But you're tough. You'll be fine now. Emma turned from the stove, a plate in her hands. I hope you don't mind, but I found some potatoes and salt pork in your root cellar. There's coffee too, fresh made. The simple meal was better than anything Quinn had eaten in months, perhaps because it had been prepared by someone else's hands. As they ate, Thomas gradually overcame his shyness, asking questions about the ranch, the cattle, and especially Ranger, who had appointed himself the boy's protector. "Do you have any books?" Thomas asked hopefully, once his appetite had returned enough for him to finish his breakfast. "Tommy loves stories," Emma explained. "He's quite the reader for his age." Quinn hesitated, then rose and went to a trunk in the corner of the room. From it, he extracted a small stack of well-worn volumes, his mother's books, preserved all these years. "These were my mother's," he said, offering them to Thomas. "Some might be too advanced, but there are a few adventure stories you might enjoy." The boy's face lit up, his recent illness momentarily forgotten as he eagerly examined the books. Emma's expression, when Quinn met her gaze, held something that made him look quickly away, gratitude mixed with a warmth he wasn't prepared to acknowledge. "That's very kind," she said softly. "Thank you." Quinn shrugged, uncomfortable with her thanks. "They've just been sitting there. Might as well be read." The next days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Quinn tended to his ranch duties while Emma managed the household, preparing meals from his limited stores with impressive creativity. Thomas regained his strength rapidly, soon well enough to follow Quinn around the property, asking endless questions about ranching life. On the fourth day, Quinn found himself showing the boy how to repair a bridle in the barn, the child's small fingers working diligently alongside his own. Thomas's eager attentiveness stirred something in Quinn he'd long forgotten. The simple pleasure of passing on knowledge, of being needed for more than just the strength of his back. "Emma says we'll leave as soon as the pass clears," Thomas commented, looking up at Quinn with innocent directness. "Do you want us to go?" The question caught Quinn off guard. "It's not about what I want," he answered carefully. "Your uncle is expecting you and Helena. That's where you belong." Thomas considered this with surprising seriousness for an 8-year-old. "But don't you get lonely out here? All by yourself?" Quinn's hands stilled on the leather strap he was working. "A man gets used to his own company. Emma gets lonely," Thomas confided. "She thinks I don't notice, but she cries sometimes at night. Since Ma and Pa died." Quinn swallowed hard, unsure how to respond to the boy's candor. "Your sister is very brave, taking care of you, making this journey." Thomas nodded solemnly. "She says we have to be strong for each other. That's what family does." He looked at Quinn with innocent curiosity. "Don't you have any family?" "No," Quinn said simply. "Not anymore." That evening, after Thomas had fallen asleep with one of the books open on his chest, Quinn found Emma standing on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. The night was clear, stars brilliant above the snow-covered landscape. "Thomas seems fully recovered," Quinn observed, joining her at the railing. Emma nodded. "Thanks to you. If you hadn't found us." She left the sentence unfinished, the alternative too grim to voice. "The boy's a quick study," Quinn said. "He was helping me with the tack today. Got a good head on his shoulders." A small smile touched Emma's lips. "He admires you. Already talking about becoming a rancher instead of a lawyer like our uncle." Quinn felt an unexpected warmth at her words. "The pass should be clear enough by the end of the week, if the weather holds. I can take you as far as the junction, where you can catch the stage to Helena." Emma was silent for a long moment. "Yes, I suppose we've imposed on your solitude long enough." There was something in her voice, regret, perhaps, or resignation. "You haven't imposed," Quinn said, the words coming out more forcefully than he'd intended. "It's been—" He searched for the right description. "Nice. Having company." Emma turned to him, her face partially shadowed in the moonlight. "For someone who values his solitude, you've been remarkably patient with a sick child and an unexpected housekeeper." "You're more than that," Quinn said, surprising himself. But what was she? A stranger who had upended his carefully constructed isolation? A woman whose quiet strength reminded him of everything he'd tried to forget about human connection? A temporary presence who would soon return to her proper place in the world, leaving him alone as he'd been before? Before he could find the words, a distant howl broke the silence. Wolves, hunting in the moonlight. The familiar sound jolted Quinn back to reality. "It's getting cold," he said abruptly. "We should go in." As he followed Emma inside, Quinn felt the walls he'd built around himself beginning to crack. 8 years of solitude had taught him to survive on his own, to need nothing and no one. Yet in less than a week, Emma and Thomas had somehow slipped past his defenses, awakening emotions he'd believed long dead. And in 6 days, they would be gone, leaving him to the silence he'd once treasured but now dreaded with unexpected intensity. On the morning they were to depart for the junction, Quinn found himself moving with reluctance, double-checking supplies that were already prepared, adjusting harnesses that needed no adjustment. He'd repaired Emma's wagon wheel and hitched it to his strongest team, ensuring they would reach the junction safely. Inside the cabin, Emma was helping Thomas gather his few belongings. The boy's face was solemn, his earlier excitement about the journey replaced by quiet withdrawal. Quinn understood the feeling all too well. "Ready?" he asked, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Emma nodded, her hair neatly braided again, her travel dress brushed clean. "Yes, thank you for all your help with the wagon." The formality between them felt wrong after the easy companionship of the past week. Quinn wanted to say something, anything, to break through it, but the words wouldn't come. The journey to the junction passed largely in silence. Thomas sat between them on the wagon seat, occasionally pointing out wildlife or asking questions about landmarks they passed. Emma responded with gentle patience, though Quinn noticed a certain tension in her posture, a sadness in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. They reached the junction by mid-afternoon. The stage wouldn't arrive until the following morning, which meant one night at the small way station, a rough building with a public room and 2 small sleeping chambers. After arranging for their passage and seeing to their overnight accommodations, Quinn found himself with nothing left to do but say goodbye. The realization hit him with unexpected force. "You're all set," he said, his voice gruffer than intended. "The stage should have you and Helena by tomorrow evening." Emma nodded, her eyes meeting his briefly before looking away. "Thank you again. For everything." "Emma," Quinn began, uncertain what he meant to say. Before he could continue, Thomas ran up, excited about something he'd seen in the way station. "Quinn, there's a man inside with a real sheriff's badge. He says he's going all the way to Helena too." Quinn forced a smile. "Is that so? Well, you'll have plenty of company on your journey then." The boy's excitement faltered as the reality of their parting seemed to dawn on him. "Will you write to us? Emma can read your letters to me." "Tommy," Emma gently chided, "Mr. Caldwell has his ranch to run. He'll be too busy for letters." Quinn looked between them, the hopeful boy and the woman who had somehow, in just 10 days, made him question 8 years of solitude. Something shifted inside him, a certainty forming where there had been only confusion. "Actually," he said slowly, "I was thinking I might come to Helena myself. In the spring." He met Emma's startled gaze. "If that would be welcome." Color rose in Emma's cheeks. "Very welcome," she said softly. It wasn't much, just a promise, a possibility, but it was more than Quinn had allowed himself in years. As he prepared to mount his horse for the ride back to his ranch, Thomas surprised him with a fierce hug around the waist. "Thank you for saving us," the boy said. Quinn awkwardly patted his shoulder, then looked up to find Emma watching them, her eyes bright with unshed tears. On impulse, he reached for her hand, pressing it briefly between his own. "Spring isn't so far away," he said, his voice low. "And Helena isn't the end of the world." A smile trembled on her lips. "No, it's not." As Quinn rode away, the emptiness he'd expected to feel was tempered by something new, a sense of anticipation, of possibility. For the first time in 8 years, he was riding towards something, not just away from his past. The North Star Ranch would feel different now, not just a refuge from the world, but a starting point for whatever might come next. February brought unusually bitter cold to the Montana Territory. Quinn worked from dawn till dusk, pushing himself harder than ever before. The physical labor kept his mind occupied, preventing it from dwelling too often on the letters that arrived from Helena every 2 weeks. Emma's neat handwriting detailing their settlement with their uncle, Thomas's progress in school, the life they were building. He wrote back with unaccustomed diligence, his initial awkward reports about cattle and weather gradually expanding to include his thoughts, memories of his parents, plans for the ranch's future. With each letter, the distance between them seemed to shrink, their connection deepening despite their physical separation. It was during the worst blizzard of the season, as Quinn sat beside his fire reading Emma's latest letter by lamplight, that a pounding at his door startled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find his nearest neighbor, Jacob Miller, snow-covered and desperate. "Quinn, thank God," the man gasped. "My Mary's in labor. The midwife can't get through this storm. Doc Palmer's in Bozeman. You're our only hope." Quinn stared at him in confusion. "Jacob, I don't know anything about birthing babies. But you delivered that calf last spring when it was turned wrong. Mary's in a bad way. Breech, we think." Jacob's eyes were wild with fear. "Please, Quinn, we've got no one else." The ride to the Miller homestead was a nightmare of blinding snow and bone-chilling cold. Inside the small cabin, Mary Miller lay pale and exhausted, clearly having been in labor for many hours. Her sister sat beside her, looking almost as frightened as Jacob. Quinn had never felt more out of his depth. Yet as he approached the bed, Emma's words from one of her letters came back to him. Sometimes courage isn't about knowing what to do, but being willing to try when no one else can. Drawing on every scrap of knowledge he had about difficult births in cattle, along with common sense and the desperate instructions of Mary's sister, Quinn worked through the night. By dawn, a healthy baby boy lay in Mary's arms, and Quinn sat exhausted but triumphant in the corner. "We'll name him Quinn," Jacob declared, gripping Quinn's shoulder with tearful gratitude. "You saved them both." As Quinn rode home through the breaking dawn, the storm finally clearing, he realized something had fundamentally changed. For years, he'd believed the frontier required isolation to survive, that connections were vulnerabilities, dependencies that would ultimately destroy him as they had his parents. But the truth was becoming clear. Out here, people needed each other. The lone survivor was a myth. It was through connection, through community, that one truly conquered the wilderness. When spring finally arrived, Quinn left the ranch in the care of a hired hand and boarded the stage to Helena, his heart pounding with equal parts anticipation and fear. Emma had continued to write, but a nagging doubt remained. Perhaps she had built a satisfactory life in Helena. Perhaps she and Thomas had adjusted to city living and would find the isolated ranch life unappealing now. Helena bustled with activity, a proper city compared to the scattered homesteads he was accustomed to. Quinn felt distinctly out of place in his best shirt and freshly trimmed hair as he made his way to the address Emma had provided, her uncle's law office on the main street. He found Thomas first, sitting on the steps outside the office, deeply engrossed in a book. The boy had grown taller in the months since Quinn had seen him last. "That any good?" Quinn asked, stopping before him. Thomas looked up, his face transforming with joy. "Quinn," he exclaimed, launching himself forward. "You came. Emma said you would, but Uncle Robert said ranchers rarely leave their land in spring." Quinn smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Your uncle might be right about most ranchers, but I made a promise." "Emma's inside," Thomas said, grabbing Quinn's hand and pulling him toward the door. "She's been watching the stage arrival every day this week." The law office was well appointed, with leather-bound books lining the walls and polished wooden furniture. A gray-haired man Quinn presumed to be Robert looked up from his desk with curiosity as they entered. "Uncle Robert, this is Quinn Caldwell," Thomas announced proudly, "the rancher who saved us." Before the older man could respond, a door at the back of the office opened, and Emma appeared. She wore a dove-gray dress that complemented her eyes, her wheat gold hair arranged more formally than Quinn had seen before. For a moment, she seemed like a stranger, a city woman far removed from the practical young woman who had cooked at his stove and tended her brother in his cabin. Then she smiled, and the distance vanished. "You came," she said simply, her voice warm with pleasure. "I said I would," Quinn replied, suddenly aware of his rough hands and sun-weathered face among these civilized surroundings. Robert cleared his throat. "So you're the rancher who rescued my niece and nephew." "I'm in your debt, sir." Quinn shook his head. "No debt necessary. Anyone would have done the same." "But no one else did," Emma said quietly. "You did." The days that followed were unlike any Quinn had experienced. Emma showed him the city while Thomas enthusiastically pointed out his school, his favorite spots, the library where he spent hours reading. Quinn watched them interact with this world, so different from his ranch, and wondered if he had been mistaken to come, if they truly belonged here now. On his third evening in Helena, Quinn and Emma walked alone through the small park near the center of town, Thomas having been persuaded to remain home with his uncle. "You've been quiet today," Emma observed. "Is something troubling you?" Quinn paused, choosing his words carefully. "You and Thomas seem settled here. It's a good life for him, school, Books, other children. Emma studied his face. It's a comfortable life, she agreed. Uncle Robert has been very kind. More comfortable than a remote ranch with winter blizzards and spring mud, Quinn said, voicing the doubt that had been growing. Quinn, Emma said, turning to face him directly. Why did you come to Helena? The directness of her question caught him off guard. I said I would. Is that the only reason? Quinn looked away, then back at her, finding courage he hadn't known he possessed. No, I came because in 10 days, you and Thomas showed me what I'd been missing for 8 years. Because every letter you sent made my cabin seem emptier when I finished reading it. Because, he stopped, struggling with emotions long suppressed. Emma took a step closer. Because I think I've been waiting for you without knowing it, he finished, the truth of it washing over him as he spoke. But seeing you here, in this life that suits you so well, suits me. Emma interrupted, her eyes flashing suddenly. Quinn Caldwell, you presume too much. This life is comfortable, yes. Safe, certainly. But it's not mine. Her voice softened. Do you know what I dream about, living in my uncle's fine house? I dream of mountains covered in snow, of open skies that go on forever, of a cabin where I felt more at home in 10 days than I have anywhere since my parents died. Quinn stared at her, hope rising within him. What are you saying, Emma? I'm saying that Thomas talks constantly about your ranch, your horses, how you taught him to repair tack. I'm saying that I've been counting the days until you arrived, wondering if you felt even a fraction of what I've come to feel. Her cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. I'm saying that comfort isn't the same as belonging. Quinn closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. I've never been good with words, Emma, but I know that my ranch stopped feeling like home the moment you and Thomas left it. Then ask me, she whispered. Ask me what you came to ask. With sunlight filtering through the budding trees above them and the sounds of the city fading into insignificance, Quinn found the words he'd traveled all this way to say. Emma Zimmerman, would you and Thomas consider coming back to the North Star with me? Not as guests this time, but as family? I know it's a harder life than this, but, she silenced him with a finger to his lips. It's not a harder life when it's the right life. When it's with the right person. Is that a yes? Her smile was answer enough, but she spoke the words he needed to hear. Yes, Quinn. Yes to all of it. Fall had returned to the Montana Territory, painting the land in golds and crimsons just as it had been when Quinn first found Emma and Thomas stranded in the snow. But the North Star Ranch was transformed in ways that went far beyond the new addition to the cabin or the expanded herd in the pastures. Quinn stood on the porch, watching as Thomas raced across the yard with Ranger, the boy's laughter carrying on the crisp autumn air. At 9, he'd grown inches over the summer, his city pallor replaced by the healthy tan of a child who spent his days outdoors. Though Quinn still ensured he kept up with his studies, Thomas had taken to ranch life with natural enthusiasm, proudly helping with chores and soaking up Quinn's teachings about cattle and horses. The sound of the door opening behind him drew Quinn's attention. Emma emerged, her weak gold hair loose around her shoulders, her green eyes warm with contentment. 5 months as his wife had added a new confidence to her movements, a sureness of belonging that matched his own. The bread's cooling, she said, coming to stand beside him. And I've put up another jar of preserves. We'll be well stocked for winter this year. Quinn slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her close against the chill in the air. Better than salt pork and potatoes from the root cellar? She laughed, leaning into him. Much better, though I maintain I made the best of what was available. You did at that, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. They stood together, watching Thomas play as the first snowflakes of the season began to drift lazily from the sky. The sight no longer filled Quinn with dread. Instead, he found himself looking forward to evenings by the fire, Emma's reading aloud from one of her books, while Thomas built elaborate structures with the wooden blocks Quinn had carved for him. We should call him in, Emma said, though she made no move to do so. Before it gets too cold. Quinn nodded, but tightened his arm around her. In a minute, the snow began to fall more heavily, the temperature dropping as the sun dipped toward the mountains. Thomas continued his game, seemingly oblivious to the weather change, while Ranger bounded joyfully through the gathering snow. Emma shivered slightly against Quinn's side. I should have brought my shawl. Without hesitation, Quinn opened his heavy coat, creating a space for her. Sir, can I slip under your coat? Emma whispered with playful formality, her eyes dancing. "I find myself chilled by this Montana weather." The request, so innocent yet intimate, caught Quinn by surprise. He froze momentarily, struck by how far they had come, from strangers thrust together by circumstance to a family bound by choice and love. "Always," he answered, wrapping his coat and arms around her as she nestled against his chest. As they stood together watching the snow transform their land, Quinn reflected on the false belief that had governed his life for so long, that the frontier demanded isolation, that connections were weaknesses rather than strengths. Emma and Thomas had shown him the truth, that it was in sharing the burden, in facing the wilderness together, that one truly conquered it. "We should go in," Emma murmured eventually. "Call Thomas for supper." "In a minute," Quinn said again, savoring the moment. His wife in his arms, his son playing in the yard of the home they had built together, the future stretching before them with all its challenges and joys. The North Star Ranch was no longer a place of solitary survival. It had become what Quinn had never dared to hope for. Not just a home, but a sanctuary for the family he'd found when he least expected it, when a broken wagon wheel and a snowstorm had delivered Emma and Thomas into his life, forever changing it. And as the snow continued to fall, blanketing their world in pristine white, Quinn Caldwell held his wife close under his coat and gave thanks for the storm that had brought them together.